For over a century, maps and atlases, and even Google Earth, showed an island called Sandy Island, sitting in the Coral Sea between Australia and New Caledonia, roughly the size of Manhattan. In November 2012, a team of scientists sailed a research vessel directly through its charted coordinates and found nothing but open ocean, roughly 1,400 meters deep, with no land in sight. This isn't an internet myth or a mapping app glitch. Sandy Island's disappearance was documented by an actual scientific expedition aboard a university research vessel, published afterward in a peer-reviewed academic journal, and its removal from official databases made international news within days. For more than 130 years, ships, cartographers, and eventually search engines all quietly agreed an island existed at that exact spot in the ocean, and not one of them, in over a century, had ever actually stopped to look. Sandy Island first appeared on nautical charts as early as 1876, in an era when much of the Pacific and Coral Sea was still being surveyed by sailing vessels using compasses, sextants, and dead reckoning rather than any precise satellite positioning. The most likely original source was a 19th-century whaling ship's sighting, possibly of a raft of floating volcanic pumice, mistaken for solid land in poor visibility, though a simple charting error made in good faith by an overworked ship's navigator is equally plausible. It appeared on French hydrographic charts under the name Île de Sable, literally Sand Island, shown at roughly 24 kilometers long and several kilometers wide, sitting in open water in the Coral Sea between the Chesterfield Islands and New Caledonia. British Admiralty charts picked it up soon after, listing it with a note of existence doubtful that, over the following decades, was gradually dropped from later reprintings as map makers simply copied the island forward from the edition before. Over the following century, the island was copied uncritically from map to map, atlas to atlas, printed and reprinted by publishers who had no independent way to verify a speck of land in a remote stretch of open ocean thousands of kilometers from the nearest port. Eventually, it made its way into modern digital mapping databases, including the widely licensed World Vector Shoreline dataset used by systems like Google Earth and Google Maps, which by the 2000s displayed Sandy Island as a solid black landmass clearly visible on satellite view, indistinguishable at a glance from any real island nearby. In November 2012, a team of marine geologists from the University of Sydney, aboard the Australian research vessel Southern Surveyor, was conducting a geological survey of a tectonic plate boundary running through the Coral Sea as part of a broader study of the region's underwater volcanic history. Reviewing their planned route on the ship's onboard navigation software the night before, Dr. Maria Seaton and her team noticed that Sandy Island's charted coordinates sat almost directly in their intended path, and that the island appeared on some of their reference maps but was conspicuously absent from others, including some of the more recent nautical charts used for actual navigation. Curious that a land mass reportedly the size of a small city appeared inconsistently across different mapping sources, and with nothing to lose by checking during an already planned leg of the voyage, the crew made the deliberate decision to divert slightly off their original course and sail directly over the island's exact charted location, rather than steering safely around a landmass that, if real, could have run their ship aground. When the ship reached the coordinates, the crew found only open ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction. Sonar and echo-sounding readings showed a seafloor depth of approximately 1,400 meters directly beneath the hull, nowhere close to sea level, let alone shallow enough to support an island reportedly 24 kilometers long. There was no land, no reef, no sandbar, no shallow water of any kind, anywhere near the charted position. The ship's echo sounder confirmed the same deep-water reading repeatedly as the crew deliberately crossed back and forth over the exact spot several times to rule out an instrument error. Dr. Seaton later described radioing the finding back to shore and to colleagues, genuinely unsure at first whether she was reporting a real geographic discovery worth publishing or simply an embarrassing century-old mapping mistake that had somehow gone unnoticed by everyone until a routine survey ship happened to sail directly through it. The story made international headlines within days, picked up by major news outlets across Australia, Europe, and North America under variations of the same headline: "The Island That Never Existed." Google, whose satellite imagery and maps had displayed Sandy Island prominently for years, removed it from its data within about a week of the discovery going public, crediting the University of Sydney team directly. Publishers of printed atlases that had included the island for decades, some tracing their editions back generations, issued corrections of their own once the finding was confirmed. Investigators and cartographic historians traced the likely origin to one of two competing possibilities: either a genuine 19th century sighting of drifting volcanic pumice rafts, a known phenomenon in that part of the Pacific where undersea volcanic activity periodically releases floating pumice fields large enough to be mistaken for land from a passing ship's deck, or a simple mundane charting error from over a century earlier that was then copied forward, uncorrected, into every subsequent map, atlas, and eventually digital database that followed for more than 130 years, without a single person actually sailing there to check whether the original sighting had been accurate. Sandy Island became a widely cited case study in university cartography courses and discussions of data verification, a clear real-world demonstration of how a single unverified data point can persist for generations across paper charts, printed atlases, and eventually the digital satellite databases relied on by billions of smartphone users, all without anyone confirming it firsthand. Dr. Seaton and her colleagues published their findings formally in the scientific journal EOS, turning what could have been a footnote into a peer-reviewed correction to the global map. It isn't even the only phantom island in history. Other long-charted land masses like Bermeja off the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula or several ghost islands once mapped in the Arctic and North Atlantic have similarly vanished under modern satellite and survey scrutiny once someone finally bothered to check. Some of those disappearances carried real political weight. Bermeja's presence or absence on old Mexican charts became genuinely relevant to a maritime boundary dispute with the United States over oil rights in the Gulf of Mexico decades later, since a real island there would have shifted the calculated boundary line significantly. Sandy Island remains the most famous modern example precisely because of how recently and how thoroughly it was debunked by an accredited scientific team published in a real journal, rather than fading away quietly the way older phantom islands often did. Locals in the region reportedly joked for years afterward that Sandy Island had simply sailed off somewhere else. But the more grounded truth is simpler and, in its own way, more unsettling. A reminder that even the maps we trust most completely, including the satellite imagery sitting in our own pockets today, can carry a single unverified mistake for well over a century before anyone actually thinks to sail out there and look for themselves.